Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, in which Craig Touch and myself chat to special guests about this crazy industry we're in of self-publishing. And today we have a very special guest, Brian Sachetta, who is an author, a blogger, a software developer, and he is here today to talk to us about an issue that maybe many authors don't think that often about, but it's IP, or intellectual property. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
And of course, we would not have the podcast if it wasn't for the man himself, Craig Touch, an author himself and the owner and founder of Hidden Gems. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well, Roland. Thanks. You're right. This is something not only that I think authors don't think that much about, but I think a lot of times we don't take it seriously enough. Like, we hear about it, we know about it, but it's like, is that really going to happen to us? Like, is it something that a regular author needs to worry about, or is that something that a big corporation who has expensive IP needs to worry about? And that's not us, so who cares, right? But I think what we're going to hear is a story from Brian about how we do have to take this seriously. And in fact, he was affected in a big way by this, and he's gonna tell us what happened, and then we can go over what we can do about it to protect ourselves. So Brian, thanks for showing up, and we definitely want to hear your story.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. Why don't I just kind of jump in, and then we can segue as necessary, or where it makes sense.
Absolutely. I hope this one has a happy ending.
I think we're still a little bit in the middle of the story, but we'll get there. So long and short of it, right? I write a series of books. I have a brand called Get Out of Your Head. And so I started this as a passion project in 2017, just kind of a self-published author, actually somebody I didn't really know anything about, clinical work, being in a medical industry, anything like that. I had just suffered from mental health disorders throughout my life, and had made a lot of progress with them, and wanted to take some of that progress, bottle it up, put it into a narrative, and put a book out on the market that spoke to some of my experiences. So this was when I say passion project, like, this kind of felt like, this is my life's work, this is my baby, that sort of thing. And obviously, like, as you get further along in the journey, that was 5 years ago, things change, right? It's like, I kind of look back on the first manuscript and I'm like, hey, I've gotten a lot better as a writer. Some of that writing was not super strong, but it is what it is, and we're here today. So, to continue the story, in 2018, I published the book. And it did okay, but I'm a small time author. And so it's not gonna, even if you feel as though you wrote the best book ever and it's going to magically sell like hotcakes, it doesn't always work out like that. I think a lot of folks listening to this podcast will understand that, or have been through that process before. And Yep. So I was, running some ads on Amazon, trying to get the word out there, guerrilla marketing, word of mouth and whatnot. But again, still trying to find my way, right? It's like, I didn't have a platform to begin with. So that made it difficult. But so if we fast forward to 2019, the fall time, I was at my my full-time job, and I was working with like a new employee, a new coworker, and he was like, "Hey, you were telling me about this book. What's the name of your book?" And so he looks it up on Amazon, and he's like, "Is that your book?" And I'm like, "No, what's that?" And he points at it and he's like, "That is your book, but it's not your book." And it's a book that looks a lot like mine, with the same title as mine, with a cover that looks similar to mine, but it's not mine. And it's from, at the time, I had never heard of this author, but since then has become a pretty big author, and it's by a big 5 publisher. And so I'm sitting there as one of those kind of almost cinematic moments where you're like, I know that this is the beginning of something bizarre, and I don't exactly know what's happening right now. And so fast forward a few months, that was, my friend had found, or my coworker had found that book on Amazon as a pre-order. Fast forward a few months, that book comes out, does really, really well in sales. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, Brian, who was the author of Get Out of Your Head, maybe he doesn't have that association anymore, right? Maybe that association is being changed across the country as this person sells more and more books. And then about a month after release, I was actually kicked off of Amazon for being called, like, Amazon said that I was copying this person. And at that point, I was furious. I was very angry. I had talked to lawyers before, like shortly after my coworker pointed out that this book was on Amazon, I immediately picked up phones and started calling lawyers and saying, what can I do? Right? This person or this book looks a lot like mine. I don't want to make false accusations or unfounded accusations on this podcast, because it's this stuff comes down to proof, and I don't want to necessarily point fingers, but the facts of the matter were that there was a book out there that looked like mine. Right? That's the only thing that I knew. And so I said, let me talk to a bunch of lawyers and see what my rights are here. Can I sue? Can I pursue something on the legal side? I don't know. I spoke to a bunch of them and they were kind of like, hey, we hate to tell you this, but the name of a book is not defendable. The name, like your book title, your book cover, unless you could prove that somebody basically recreated took your artwork and recycled it and turned it into theirs, you don't really have any grounds for a legal argument. So at that point, I was kind of like, well, I'm very disappointed. I'm angry. I'm upset, but I don't know if I have anything here. And then after I got kicked off of Amazon, that was, I think, in March of 2020. So I'm jumping around here a little bit, sorry. But in March of 2020, when I got kicked off of Amazon, I was so angry. And so I started picking the phones back up and I started talking to different lawyers. And we eventually got to the point where I started working with a lawyer, and he was like, hey, well, you can't trademark your one book. You can't trademark the name of a book. But what you can do, right, is trademarks cover brands and identities of brands. And so what you could do is, if you're planning on writing another book, you can trademark the book series. And I was like, well, funny you should say that. I started writing the second book, I think it was summer of 2019. So we ended up going down that path. We filed a trademark for the brand. And so, now I've got the website, I've got 2 books in the series, do the podcast, stuff like that. And so I own this brand. And the question is, so and I'm probably providing a lot of different jumping off points here and leaving it so that there's a lot of questions. But it kind of becomes like, okay, what do I do next, right? Do I wait around, or do I see that there is a violation of my trademark, and do I go after that? Do I think about the ramifications on the SEO side, on the sales side, the brand confusion, stuff like that? There's a lot of different questions there, and it does get confusing for authors. But for me right now, right, it's like I'm focusing on what I can do, letting my lawyer do what he can do. And there are definitely like some things in the works in terms of like, it feels as though there's a trademark violation, but we are working through that and trying to see how that resolves itself. But that's my overall story. And then I think, why I wanted to come on the podcast today was not necessarily just to share that, but also to connect it back to what authors that are listening to this podcast should care about. Like, why is it important that they file a trademark if that's, applicable? Does that matter for them? Could that help them? So I think I'm going to stop there and just see what questions you guys have, because that's probably a lot to take in.
Oh, I have a lot of questions. I'm sure Craig does as well. Do you want to start with yours, Craig?
I mean, we probably have a lot of the same questions, but so just so I understand the timeline of it and how it all works. So you had published yours first. This other author published theirs. You then published your trademark after they had published theirs, and then so now, how does the trademark infringement work if your trademark was granted, I guess, or filed or whatever, after that other person had put out their book? Is that relevant even?
It's a great question. It's one that we definitely have to talk about, because, as authors who are listening to this podcast will want to know, like, how would similar situations affect them, right? So you are right in sort of alluding to the question, or hinting at the idea that if a violation is not a violation if it happens before your filing of your trademark, right? So one of the things that I wanted to talk about on this podcast was the idea that so there's different ways that you can file for a trademark. So you can go to the trademark office and say, I intend to use this trademark in the future. Or maybe I am using it right now, but I'm not necessarily doing it. I'm not necessarily fulfilling the use of every single categorization, they call them classes, of the trademark that I'm going to eventually use. And so maybe I'll just say, for now, I intend to use this, even though I am using it a little bit right now. And in the future, when I fulfill all of the classes that I say that I'm going to offer products and services in, I will then say, I am using this trademark. Let's go and process it. So I think for an author, right, what I was having a conversation with a coworker recently, and I said to him, I was like, look, I don't know if this person actually plans to ever write a series of books or anything like that. But if you have the money, you would have to hire you'd either have to hire a lawyer or you'd have to file it yourself. And, one comes with a cost associated with it and the other comes with confusion. So it's a difficult decision. But I mean, if you find a lawyer, to file a trademark is probably not going to cost you more than $1,000, $2,000, something like that. It's not a small sum of money by any means, especially for an independent author, but it's also not going to cost you $100,000. So it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. But so what I was saying to my coworker I was like, if you had an idea for a book series or a brand or something like that, even before you actually start writing that book, before you start planning out the series or, filming a movie or something like that, file the trademark. And then that way, even if you are not actually fulfilling the use of the trademark yet, there is a protection there. And so what happens is you can say, I intend to use this thing. And then the Patent and Trademark Office will basically take your application in. And then if, let's just say you file a trademark for Facebook, they're going to say, hey, somebody already has this trademark, go away. And we're going to reject this, right? But if you file a trademark for a brand name that is available, then they would say, okay, we've gone through the process. We see that there's no potential confusion with other brands that exist already. And so we're actually going to put this thing up for a 30-day window where other companies can come in and basically object to your registration and say, I'm raising my hand. I use that brand. I don't think that person should be granted that trademark. After those 30 days, you are basically so you're protected the entire time, but there's more protection, or at least you feel better about your case in the sense that nobody complained about you using this trademark. And so basically, whenever you then have fulfilled the trademark itself, right? So that would mean actually writing your books or launching your website or creating a consumer brand or something like that. You could then go back to the trademark office and say, look, here's all the evidence of me using this and fulfilling the trademark. Can you now process my application, finalize the mark itself? And then at that point, you would, if everything goes according to plan, you'd get a registration number, and that trademark would be filed with the office. But the important thing, right, is I talk about sometimes with some of my friends, I love going to theme parks and I read a lot of theme park blogs. And one of the writers that I read, he will say that he'll go through the trademark filings and say oh, Disney just filed this trademark for a ride. And it's well, the ride might not be built for 4 years, but they want to get that trademark name in there as soon as possible. So that way Universal or somebody else couldn't then beat them to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it reminds me of so many different issues people cyber squatting on URLs. As soon as a company comes out and if they didn't register something to do with their product or whatever, then all of a sudden everyone started, registering those URLs and then trying to sell them back to the company, So it sounds like that kind of thing. And then your trademark too is there was a case, you might remember the details about this more than I will, but it was, I feel a couple of years ago, where some romance author tried to trademark
#Copygate.
Yeah, what was it? She was trademarking the word cocky.
Yeah. Oh, let's get into that. But I have some quick, if it's okay, I just want to ask some very basic questions just first, because I know the book that you're talking about. Now, my understanding is you published your book in 2017.
I published it in 2018.
2018. And then this book was published in 2020.
Correct.
And yet you got kicked off Amazon.
That is correct.
And the different books, I know they've got the same title, and you can't, the whole thing is you can't you can't own a title. It seems so backwards that you wrote a book, somebody else wrote a book afterwards, and yet you got kicked off. That's because they had Random House behind it, isn't it? That seems egregious. Now your book's back on sale on Amazon now, isn't it?
I am back on sale on Amazon. Yep.
How difficult was it to achieve that?
That was I don't want to embellish, right? And I don't want to say the wrong thing. For me, that was really difficult. I'm not trying to compare apples and oranges, right? It's I'm not trying to say this was some great tragedy, right? But in terms of my writing career, and also my full-time career, I had to take a vacation day from work. to just hound Amazon on the phones and get to the bottom of this solution. Get to a solution to this problem. One of the issues with dealing with a large company, Amazon or Facebook or something, Instagram. Like I had a friend who lost their Instagram handle recently. They got hacked and they just couldn't get in contact with a real person. They were talking to bots, right? And so the same thing was happening to me, where it was like, hey, if I can just get through to somebody, I will explain the issue. I actually had, and this is a different topic, but I had my copyright letter, like a registered copyright letter for the work, and I can just say, here's proof that it shouldn't even matter because my book came out well in advance of the other one. Yeah. But here's my letter. Please just instate me on the website, and we're good to go. I probably was banging the phones for 48 hours, something like that, nonstop. I didn't even sleep for 2 days. So it was pretty crazy. And I just think to myself, like, if I didn't do that, I don't know if I'd ever get back on. And, the amount of time that I spent not on the website, like calendar days, wasn't incredibly long. But if it's like, hey, if somebody is in a position where they're like, I only have 30 minutes a day to dedicate to this issue, like, you might not be back on the website for 2 months. So
yeah,
I mean, I'm experiencing that at the moment with Facebook. There's just no customer service. These things are so big that there's no one to talk to. So I'm so happy that you got your book back.
Thanks. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think if you hadn't have done that, there's no way you would be back at all, right? Amazon is shoot first, ask questions never, right? They don't care. Like, they'll just take action, and then it's on you to sort of prove your innocence, as because they assume you're guilty right away. That's just their default. I get it from a massive corporation point of view. They just can't follow up with every single case, and there are tons of people doing the wrong thing, trying to scam them. I get it, but as somebody who is on the wrong side of it, or in the sense of like it's you've been treated unfairly and it shouldn't have affected you, it sucks. And I mean, I'm actually surprised that it only took you 48 hours. We've heard all sorts of horror stories where it takes far longer, if at all.
I think we're all blaming Amazon as well, but I imagine that it had to be the publisher was like, this book's got the same title as ours, let's hit him with a copyright strike, and they had the power to do that. And it disgusts me that Amazon, that should have never happened. Amazon should have been like, this book was published 2 years earlier. Of course it's not.
Yeah, so it's good that you brought that up. I will say that I later on had my lawyer reach out to Amazon. And this is frustrating, right? Because it's like, lawyers charge hundreds of dollars an hour. So I was trying to get through to Amazon to figure out, once I was reinstated, what actually happened where I got kicked off. Because I'm sitting there like, how am I going to believe and trust that this isn't going to happen again in a week? And also I was curious, like, if there was a false, takedown notice or something like that, that would be really good for me, where, I could then go to the courts and say, these people are playing bully ball, and I don't like this. We found that when my lawyer reached out to Amazon, what they said was that the content team reviewed a bunch of different books, and they flagged my book for being similar to a bestseller. So I don't, we could chalk it up as a mistake. I don't know. That's, again, I don't want to use like the wrong terms here and make the wrong people mad. It was very frustrating though. It's very hard for me to not say that, right? Regardless of good intentions, bad intentions, I don't know. It was just frustrating.
Yeah, you were being a lot more Christian about it than I would be.
Well, and here's the thing, right? This is why I don't really put a lot of stock in that answer, because there's two problems with that. One is, if there actually is a content team, not a bot team, which is more likely, I think. But let's say there is a content team. Why would they be comparing against bestsellers instead of comparing against publication date? Like, if their goal is to be looking for violations like this, the number one violation clue is who published first, not who's sold more. Like, that's ridiculous. That doesn't even make any sense. So
that's why I think the publisher must be behind it.
Well, or it's a bot system, like their bots went through and noticed some similarities or whatever, and just auto blocked you because for whatever reason they probably have a, you're a computer engineer, you probably know, like they probably have different criteria. Maybe bestseller is one of them, but maybe has a publisher is one of them, right? Or has a big 5 publisher is one of them. Who knows, right? You
Right.
speculate all day.
I think just interesting point there is either of those possibilities, there's something wrong with it, right? Either there was a takedown, which I'm not making that claim, I don't know, but that would be bad, or there's a bot and there's an algorithm out there that is not coded properly, right? Like you said, I do software development full time. All you have to do is say in the comparison check, did this product come out before that one? It's pretty easy. So that was what was really frustrating for me. It was like, I don't have a good answer on either path. I'm going to say it was a bot, but even at that, there was a problem there.
Absolutely. So in terms of like, you got it back, and I guess, you made whatever argument, which was probably, hey, mine was published first, right? And was that the argument that got you back on?
I can't even, to be honest, I can't even tell you what it was that got me back on. And one of the reasons was because you're interacting with a lot of bots when you go back and forth with their team. I got one email that said, if you don't provide a filed copyright letter within 24 hours, you'll be banned forever. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think that should be the case, but thank God that I actually filed this thing. And thank God that I filed it long ago enough that I actually have the letter in my hands. What would happen if I publish the book and then a week later I get a takedown? Maybe I'm just banned forever. I don't know. So I don't know. It's a tough matter. And I feel like I didn't even answer your original question, but
I guess I was kind of leading somewhere, which was if they admitted it, which is very likely why they never admit anything, you could then catch them in the sense of, okay, well, if you're saying you now realize that I was the one in the right because I published first, why didn't they go to the other person and say, you're the copy, you should be taken down because this other person was first?
Yeah. So I think that sort of speaks to the issue of like, there really shouldn't be a problem in general. If you look at the law and you say that book titles are not trademarkable, it doesn't matter if you're big, small, first, last, you should be good to go.
That is a very valid point. I mean, these books have the same like concepts, but they're different books, aren't they?
Once you dive into them, yes. I think the issue is that, and this is probably a subject for another day, but I get a lot of people email me, text me, whatever, and they're like, wait a second, that book, like it says on the front, like, it basically paints itself as a mental health book. And it kind of is, but it's also a religious book. And it's like, you wouldn't know that by the front of by the cover.
Yes. Well, that was actually going to be my next question, was whether or not it was really, was it a content issue then, right? Like, was there actual similarities in content?
I don't think so. So I did my diligence. I actually read the entire book. It was not that similar. So I would say no to that one. There was a caveat or a sort of gotcha on my last answer was where I said, like, if you're first, last, big, small, it shouldn't really matter. One of the things with trademark law is you can file a trademark for a series of books, right? So for example, like Harry Potter, I can't go write a book called Harry Potter and the Enchanted bookshelf or something like that. That would allow me to get taken down. But in a case where neither person owns a trademark on the book title or like, the series that the title that is turned into a series, I don't see why it was an issue other than, it's tough. I think, Craig, you alluded to it in saying that you get it from a big publisher, not a big publisher, but a big company standpoint where it's like, they probably deal with violations and bad people or, bad actors all the time. And so they have to act fast. So I understand that. I get that. And so I'm not really necessarily arguing against that, but it's like, there are two things can exist at the same time. I can understand the high level piece of it, and I can be really mad about the low level piece when I am directly involved in it.
And I think that's the thing that really gets me. It's all very well for publishers to like throw their weight around, but at the end of the day, like this is something that's devastating to you as an author to do that. Exactly. And it's heartbreaking. And I mean, these things happen. We'll talk about Copygate, but I remember I write romance novels, and I remember writing 2 chapters of a romance novel, and I was going to call it Irish. And I paid $200 for the cover, and I came up with a concept. It was all about an Irish immigrant in New York who was a fighter, and he needs to have an arranged marriage. And then I Googled, and there was a book called Irish, which was a romance novel about an Irish fighter trying to get an arranged marriage. And it was like, I stopped writing my book immediately because they were very similar, even though they were different books. We came up with them independently.
Yep.
But it's like all that your book shares is the title, and you still got dinged. It just seems so wrong.
It was definitely frustrating. I will say at some point when Amazon put me back on the website, they said, all I got was, they said, this was an error. Your books are available again. And so it's like, they told me it was an error, so I'm believing it. And, you know, in some ways it's like, it's just nice for somebody to say like, hey, I messed up or something like that. I don't know all the actual root causes or what actually unfolded, but I guess you know, in a lot of ways as an author, right, it's like, I have to turn the page, literally and metaphorically speaking. It's like, I have to go write more books. I have to focus on my brand itself. I can't necessarily get caught up in the emotion of being in the weeds of the legal work all the time.
What? Sorry. When was all this going on? When did you get kicked off? Sorry.
Yeah, that was March of 2020.
Okay, yeah, because I'm thinking back now to we wrote a couple. I wrote a couple articles on the Amazon appeal process back in January 2022, when a lot of this very similar case was going on, and it was really widespread. A whole bunch of authors, mostly romance authors, were getting kicked off of Amazon and getting these notices that there were violations and whatever. And you know, in a lot of cases, it sounded like it was bots gone mad. But the main issue was how difficult it was for them to get back, and the fact that there's no way for them to appeal, and there was no way for them to contact Amazon other than exactly what you said. Like, I remember, you know, the one case that I had cited in the article was it was Lexi Ostro, and she wrote a 3-part blog about it at the time too, where her whole catalog got wiped out, not for any real reason. And she lost tons of money just in lost sales, and it wrecked one of her releases at the time. And she was only able to get back on after like just beating the phones and the emails and like contacting every single person she could. And it's so unnecessarily difficult, because even though they have to do this process of, you know, doing something automated to get rid of all the bad ones. And I completely do think that they have far more people doing bad things than they do, you know, the cases that shouldn't be blocked, you know, by mistake or whatever. They need some process where when it does happen, you can appeal it, and you can, like a simple process where because the people that are doing the bad things, that are intentionally screwing around, they're not going to be appealing it. They're not going to be saying, hey, Amazon, can you look more deeply into my case? They're not going to be calling any more attention to it, right? So it's not like all of a sudden, if they have an appeals process, all the people trying to break the rules are going to be appealing. So, I mean, it angers me.
I agree. Yeah, I actually read those blog posts, and I'm using the wrong word, but a little bit of PTSD for me there, just kind of hearing that. It's definitely frustrating. And I think, you know, kind of zooming out and bringing the conversation back to the listeners, like why should they care? What's important for them here, right? Is like, if you are that woman who was kicked off of Amazon and you lose sales and it ruins one of your launches, it's going to put you in a position where you say to yourself, should I even be doing this? Should I be writing books? Should I quit? Should I give up? Whatever is the deck stacked against me? And I think luckily or fortunately, in some cases, if you put the right measures in place from a trademark standpoint, if it's applicable, right, early on, then you will avoid some of those cases. I'm not saying you're going to avoid all of them, but at the end of the day, we're authors, right? We want to be able to focus on the work itself. We don't want to be stuck dealing with trying to get our books back up for sale, dealing with, you know, erroneous takedowns, and getting caught up in all the emotions that, you know, maybe get foisted on us that we don't necessarily deserve. So it's definitely an important topic.
It's so interesting to talk to you about it, because there was a case of a malicious like copyright thing a few years ago, and it's two sides to the thing. It's really heartening to see like you've researched and made this copyright thing, and it seems like you're doing everything right. And then there are other people who abuse that system as well, which is the problem. There was Copygate. There was a romance author, I can't remember her name, it's some ridiculous name, Felicia or something like that, Felinia, and she had a bunch of books. It was like Cocky Roommate and Cocky Cowboy and Cocky Lawn Service Person or whatever, and they were all about the falling in love and stuff. And she filed an official copyright for the word cocky, and then took a bunch of other authors who had cocky in the title of their books off. There's one author who I'm quite friendly with, could I can't remember her name. She wrote a book called Cocky Cowboy, and it was very popular, had a lot of reviews and things, and it got removed because of this trademark thing. There was a huge scandal about it, and it's like even the copyright can be used maliciously, but at the same time, for someone like you, it's the only thing I think that can protect your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Roland, when you were telling that story, one of the things that I guess frustrates me is I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not pretending as though I know exactly how all this stuff works. But if you have a trademark for the word cocky, you do not have a trademark for Cocky Cowboy. And so there is something going on where, again, it could just be, hey, we're a big we're a big retailer. We're feeling pressure from some lawyer, from some external organization. And so we're just going to act quickly because we don't want to have to deal with this. But at the same time, and that's sort of, there's a little bit of logic there. But at the same time, that is not how trademark law works. And the trademark that person either had or applied for or whatever, in theory, that person may, if they said to the retailer, hey, kick all these other people off because of my trademark, there's some negligence there. I don't want to say what those people are entitled to or not, because I'm not a lawyer, but I would be very upset if I were those people. And I think that woman would receive a letter from me.
Well, I think she got a lot of letters, I think.
Yeah, she got taken to court by the Romance Authors Guild of America, and she lost. I'm happy to say.
There you go.
But I mean, she caused a lot of authors a lot of harm, because she trademarked this one particular word and then went after everybody who used that word. And of course, as you said, it's like once the wheels start turning and the systems go into place, and Amazon is kicking people off for trademark infringement, even though it's not a legitimate trademark infringement. And it's just, yeah, it's so frustrating. You're right. We just want to focus on writing and publishing books, don't we?
And right, it could also be like, depending on what you're working on. Like I work in the mental health space, or I write in the mental health space. I want to focus on helping people. And here I am, like, spinning up ceases and desists and stuff like that. It's like, I want to be focusing on letting people live normal lives. Right. And so it's frustrating when it's like, I'm way off the path certain days, and I wish it didn't have to be that way, but I don't know. That's where I am.
Well, speaking of which, let's refocus now to helping people, and to how we can, like, what's the advice and what's the way forward for people to, obviously this isn't going to affect everybody, and especially when we're talking about fiction authors. Obviously, I mean, Harry Potter is an example of a fiction case where it is very relevant. But if somebody's writing a book and it's a fiction book, first of all, even if it becomes super, popular and there is something they could have trademarked, I think for most people, you're not even in that headspace of thinking, I should trademark this. When J.K. Rowling wrote the first Harry Potter, I imagine she had no idea it was going to explode the way it did. And she probably didn't trademark Harry Potter or anything until much later, right? So, how do we, what do we trademark? How do we decide when to trademark? And is it just for series, and, all those kind of questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that part of the answer is yes, it's sort of for series. I think another part of the answer is that hopefully folks are listening to this podcast and getting this information now, because I totally agree. It's like, as an author, you kind of shouldn't have to deal with this stuff. You shouldn't need to be in this headspace. But unfortunately, you may find yourself down the road in it and be like, oh man, I wish I did something earlier. I know I find myself in that space some days. So it's like, if you're listening, I think the advice is think about what you are maybe going to bring to market in the future. if you write a book, like there'll be a lot of folks listening to this podcast that write, romance, sci-fi, maybe series, something like that, right? So if it's like, if I'm writing a romance series and I'm totally making up a name, but it's like the Adventures of Jane and John Doe or something like that. And that person says, hey, I'm only working on book 1, but like eventually I dream of there being 10 of these books. That person should think about maybe filing a trademark for the Adventures of John and Jane Doe or something like that.
I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, I wrote a series about the Knuckleheads Motorcycle Club, and there is a Knucklehead saloon down in Kansas City and Knuckleheads gangs and stuff. And it's like, maybe I should trademark that, because otherwise I could end up getting in trouble. And listening to this, I'm like, I need to get cracking on that. So how did you even go about it?
Yeah, so I have a friend who works in the legal field. So I reached out to him. He was at an attorney's office, and he was like, talk to my boss. I talked to that guy. He was kind of like, I'm not an IP person, so you want an IP lawyer. And the impetus for me doing this was me, seeing this other book coming down the pipeline from a big 5 publisher and being like, this is bad because this is supposed to be my brand, and I don't know what's going to happen here. And then also getting kicked off of Amazon and seeing, that this book has done really well. It's like, I mean, I don't really care how many books this person sells. I just care that my brand is my brand, and I think most authors would feel that way. The issue is when you've written the Adventures of Jane and John Doe, and all of a sudden somebody else has, and the buzz around the country is that, Roland didn't write that series, but Jimmy did. It's like, that's a problem for you. So the impetus again for me was just wanting to protect the brand. And then I started talking to different lawyers. I will say one thing that was so funny was I had a bunch of different friends connect me to folks. And I was like, look, I'm just going to keep going until I find someone. And so I talked to a big corporate lawyer, and he was like, look, it doesn't make sense. We do law for like big corporations. We charge a ton of money. But let me make you a recommendation to a friend who does IP law. And I talked to that person, and he was like, unfortunately, I can't represent you. There's a conflict of interest. I'll let you read into what that means. But so I was like, okay, that's really interesting. You never know who you're going to talk to. And then I got a recommendation to a different lawyer, IP lawyer, smaller firm or smaller guy. And that's who I'm working with now. We've been working together for a couple of years. He did the trademark for me, like the filings, and, working on the demand letters and stuff like that. So some of it is right. It's a matter of necessity, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you feel like you need to do this thing, then you get pushed into it naturally. I am hoping that folks that are listening to this podcast are instead saying to themselves, because I'm here, because I'm listening to this content, I'm going to be proactive because I know what products I'm going to bring to the market down the road.
Yeah. And I mean, you can choose to use it just to protect yourself, right? To keep yourself from being booted off of Amazon, from having your, being told that you're not the person who made this thing, and you're like at least able to pull that out and be, yes, I am, right? Or you could wield it like a mighty sword and go after the person who, did this to you, right? So my question is, were you going to do that? Did you do that?
Yeah, we've sent some demand letters. I think this is one of the other difficult things, right? Is like as a small author, one, your budget is inevitably going to be smaller than a top 5 publishing house in the US. They have much, deeper pockets. They have lawyers on staff. So that right there makes it difficult, right? It's like, I'm not going to say how much I'm willing to put into this effort because, that's important information that the publisher may want to know. But I've spent some money on this, and, we are trying to pursue it. We've sent some letters. I think, the difficulty, right, is like, if your rights, and by rights, I mean, like, if you don't file your trademark at the right time, if the law is murky around like, okay, well, they did publish this, and then there's sort of this other violation over here, but, we'd have to go to court, and the judge would really have to dig into the case law and figure out, they may even have to, it may be a new kind of decision where precedent gets set. Us small authors probably don't want to go down that road. It costs a lot of money, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is, if you were to start on day one and say, I'm going to publish this series, I'm going to create this brand, and because of that, I'm going to file my trademark today, then your rights are going to be they're going to be as strong as they can be. And then when you go to somebody who is violating your trademark, they may, the tough thing is they're rarely going to strongly admit their fault or their guilt, right? But if you say like, look, this is very clear and obvious, then you have a better case, right? And your chances of settling with that party are stronger. The odds that they want to go to court are lower because they know that they will lose. So it's all about, precedence, priority, the strength of your rights and the timing of all this stuff. So yeah, for me, I mean, I'm continuing to pursue it, but there is definitely a part of me, a large part of me, that wishes that I talked to the right people, 6 months before I met my current lawyer, and we got this squared away at that time, because I would have a very strong case.
Yeah, and I think it also goes to what your goals are. Like, I'm not suggesting, like, in general, people who would file a trademark on something and then somebody else comes along and publishes something with a similar name or whatever, but it's clearly not meant to be a copy. I'm not saying you should be targeting them, right? But in your case, where you actually had a lot of costs involved with this and you got pulled off of Amazon, in that case, it's not like you're being vindictive in terms of going after that other person, but you are at least trying to get back what you've lost. You're not trying to say, now I need to earn every single, you have to send me every penny you make for that song. And like, there's another example in my head about some really famous song. I forget.
Sam Smith had one recently.
No, this is an older one where
okay.
It was like they sampled something,
yes,
and they weren't supposed to, and
happens
then like every single time, and it's a popular song, and every single time that you get played, all that money goes to the original person.
There was, I don't know how old we're talking, but there was a Robin Thicke song from 2013 that apparently sampled from a Marvin Gaye song, and the Marvin Gaye estate apparently won that case, and I think they won a lot of money. That's what I was told. I took a music class.
It sounds like it might be, because I remember that one.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's not what you're trying to do, obviously, right? You're trying to just at least get back some of what you lost.
I think the other thing too, though, right, is like, you do want to protect the brand, and if the other party continues to violate your trademark and sell goods and basically dilute your brand value, they are in some ways, like, I'm not necessarily saying that I have tens of millions of followers and that they are necessarily piggybacking off of that. I'm saying that they're, stealing my brand's thunder. And so it's like, if I were the Boston Red Sox, obviously the Boston Red Sox are a big, big brand. But if somebody goes out and sells, jerseys, hats, T-shirts that say Boston Red Sox on it, and they don't have permission to do that, the Red Sox can be like, you basically just made money, that should have gone to us. And so there's a path there where it's murky. It's hard to say, like, hey, well, this person has a platform, so they sold some product on their own volition. But at the same time, they did use your brand and you have a trademark for it. So that is a possibility.
Right. But in your case, because you filed the trademark after they published their one book, would they now have to publish another book with the same name for you to be able to say, well, that was a trademark infringement?
Not necessarily. So going back to like trademark classes, which are basically just like the categories in which you say you're going to deliver the goods. So I have two trademark classes. So one is in like educational services or educational like things that I provide. So it's kind of like my blog and, pamphlets that I create and coaching services and stuff like that. And then the other one is a series of books. And so, somebody who is violating the trademark doesn't necessarily need to write a second book and expand the book series. They could go do a tour, say like, this is the XYZ tour. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I have, the trademark class for educational services. So this is creating a likelihood of confusion in the market, basically pitting my brand against theirs. So there is definitely potential for I don't know, some damages there. It's trademark law. I mean, I think all law, right? It comes down to very fine details, precedents, all that sort of stuff. So it's confusing and it's definitely kind of painstaking, but there's a lot of different possibilities given what your rights are, what the violations are.
Right.
It strikes me that one of the consistent things about this is when people get nobbled by these things, normally there is somebody with malicious or selfish intent behind it. With Copygate, it was a writer with a huge ego deciding that she was going to swing her copy around. And with you, it seems like there was a publisher who was just like, this book sounds like ours. We're going to hit him with a copyright strike because we're so big. We don't give an F. We're just going to like take it off. It always seems to be like there's some malicious intent behind the way these systems get abused.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know
think,
that
right?
for sure.
We don't
Yeah,
know what happened, right?
We don't know that. I think at the end of the day, like what it comes down to is like, I want to protect the brand. It's the same thing as like, you know, you see a mother at a park, like, you know, yelling at some guy who's coming up to the kids or whatever. It's like, that guy could have just been trying to be friendly, but the mother is like, I'm protecting my kids, you know? And so it's the same kind of thing where it's like, I have no idea what any intentions were. All I know is that this is my brand and I'm going to protect it. It could have been, you know, friendly fire or whatever you want to call it, like not even on somebody's radar, but it's my brand. And so, yeah, I plan to protect it.
Right. And that I think is the important thing, right? It's your thing. It doesn't matter if people do it by accident or, I mean, if they're doing it by accident, you know, then they're probably a lot more likely to want to resolve it quickly and be like, oh, sorry, we didn't even realize, and change their title or whatever, right? Especially if you come out of the gate with all that stuff worked out, which is what your advice is, you know, come out of the gate with it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's funny, I've talked to a lot of different people along this process, and a lot of them have been like, hey, you know, I see some striking similarities there. You know, the old saying, what is it? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery or something like that. And I was like, look, like there is something to that. But when you are an author and, you know, your brand is being eroded against, somebody is taking, you know, your brainchild from you, that, you know, the flattery doesn't really get you anywhere. I think also for folks that are listening, right, it's like, let's say, you know, in the digital age, SEO matters a lot. If people go and type your brand into Google and you're on the 10th page, guess what? Nobody's going to your website. You're not selling any products. The other thing too is like, in terms of like Amazon keywords and advertising, if your brand is what you are using as a keyword to advertise against, and then all of a sudden, you know, some big company comes along and popularizes that term, that brand name, something like that, guess what's happening to those keywords? They're going way up in price. So it behooves all of us to think about these things, protect the brand on many different levels.
Yeah, those are good points for sure. Well, listen, I think this was very important information that really I hope a lot of people take seriously. I think we've given quite a number of examples about the times where this has really hit somebody hard, and it's not just one of those things that people talk about and be like, that doesn't really, you know, people say you got to protect your IP, but what's going to happen, right? I think we've had quite a few examples here of what can happen, you know. So
you don't need flood insurance until your house is flooded, you know.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so true. And my house got flooded 2 years in a row back a couple houses ago, so I agree with that. Flood insurance was the best. So yeah, no, I'm really glad that you came on here, and I mean, it sucks for the circumstances that you had to go through this, but we learn from your pain. So hopefully
that is part of the ethos of the brand in general. So, you know, it's like, I'm happy to do that. I look at this as like the entire brand, the experience. It's like, okay, what has happened has happened. How do we do something positive? I'm not necessarily saying like turn this into like, you know, kumbaya or something like that, but how do we take a sliver of positivity away from this?
Right. And that's, you know, that's what we're always trying to do here, is sort of like give people the idea of, you know, what they should do, what the best practices are, what they can learn from other authors that have gone through things similarly. You know, there's some authors that want to protect their information and never want to share anything, and they figure like that's going to give them some competitive edge. I'm sort of the opposite, where I think that, you know, obviously I'm not saying share your IP, but, you know, there's things that, you know, as a community, we can grow stronger by sharing sort of like what we've gone through and the lessons we've learned.
Most definitely.
Yeah. I find it so ironic. You wrote a book about, you know, overcoming anxiety, and then Amazon's like, it's cute, this guy's written a book about overcoming anxiety. Hold my beer. I'm going to give him some major anxiety now.
Here's a lot of it. Yep. So yeah, it's tough. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's like, I've dealt with depression as well. I have a book out on depression. It's volume 2 of the series. Some of those dealings, it's like, man, you find yourself in that dark pit when it's like, It doesn't seem as though your books are going to get put back online. It seems as though, the war against the big publisher is totally over. It seems as though the world is not on your side. So it's definitely, again, just stressing the point of like, it's worth it to give these ideas some consideration, whether or not you actually file a trademark, whether or not you actually hire a lawyer. That's up to you, right? But we're putting the information out there and letting folks make their own decisions.
And I think this has been such a valuable conversation to have. We really appreciate you coming on board to tell us this, because this, I mean, even to me, I'm like, you know what? This is stuff I need to take care of.
I'm happy to hear that. It's great. So,
well, Craig, do you have any more thoughts before we wrap it up? And Brian, we're going to give you a chance to shout out all your stuff first. I just want to hear from the man himself.
No, listen, like we've said it all now. I really, really appreciate you coming on and telling us your story. And I know it brought up some painful memories for you. So, we appreciate you being willing to go through the PTSD of all that again. But yeah, let us know what else you're up to, what other stuff you're producing, and let's plug something of yours, at least to give you some silver lining here.
Cool. Yeah, happy to do that.
I saw the description for your book, and I'm interested in reading your book because I have like crazy anxiety. So like, tell us where people can find it, find more about you, find more about Get Out of Your Head.
Yeah. So getoutofyourhead.com is probably the best place. On there, you would find my books, my blog, my coaching practice. You can even buy some merch if you want. I have one of the branded t-shirts on right now. So it's a bit of like a heavy metal kind of theme, really kind of striking a specific sort of tone with the brand. But yeah, getoutofyourhead.com is a great place. I try to be frequent on Instagram. The handle there is also, it's Get Out of Your Head. Both of those, there's no dashes or spaces or anything like that in there. And then if you want to find like the books, like if you want to go right to Amazon, just type in my name. It will be easier to find it that way rather than the published book that we alluded to on this podcast.
Right.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that, Brian. We will wrap things up, but hopefully everyone who's listening to this has got a lot out of this. We've had some really great guests on recently, but this has been a fantastic episode. So make sure, if you're tuning, to drop a comment down below, check out Brian's books, give us a like if you haven't already, and a subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you so much, Brian, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. Thanks, Craig. Good conversation. Hope we helped some people. So
yeah, thanks.
Fingers crossed. And we will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, stay tuned.